My name is Heather Gallagher. I'm a naturalist at Warner Park Nature Center, and I'm joined by Melissa Donahue, also a naturalist. Warner Park Nature Center has partnered with Metro Parks and Recreation of Nashville, Tennessee, and our Friends of Warner Parks organization to bring you this Zoom virtual program this evening. We're going to visit all 10 cemeteries tonight, one at a time, and just kind of learn a little bit about each cemetery, as well as some restoration efforts through Metro Parks and Recreation, as well as the Nature Center and Friends of Warner Parks. When you think of Warner Parks, you probably think of the alley at the end of Bellmead Boulevard. Some people call it the Steps, which was recently restored by Friends of Warner Parks, and just a beautiful place to enjoy Warner Parks. Or you might think about the Chickering Road entrance in spring, in fall or in spring, when the leaves are just coming out, or the leaves are turning bright yellow and it looks like those maple trees are almost on fire. Some people think of Warner Parks and they think of the Red Trail and Dripping Springs. I bet it's more than Dripping Springs today. The wildflowers that you might observe. The trails, the mountain bike trails, the old roadway. But let's back up and again, just kind of remind ourselves the history of Warner Park, not the land, the history of Warner Park. So Colonel Luke Lee, who was the chair of the Bellmead Company, donated the first 860 plus acres that would become Warner Park in 1927. His father-in-law was Percy Warner. Percy Warner was a Nashville businessman and also the chair of the park board at this time. He suddenly passed away right after Luke Lee's donation. And so Luke Lee petitioned the park board to name this land Percy Warner Park. Edwin Warner succeeded his brother Percy as the head of the park board and actually donated money to purchase the Woldwine Farm, and that's where the Nature Center sits right now, and that's why this side of Old Hickory Boulevard is called Edwin Warner Park. But I want to take you back before these men, before they got involved, and tell you about some things that maybe you see every day and you have some questions about. So you better put your listening ears on because I've got a lot to share. The first cemetery here in the Warner Parks is located right outside this door, but I've got to tell you kind of some people that I owe everything that I've learned about Warner Parks to. The first one is up in the upper left-hand corner. If you can see my cursor, this is John Hardcastle. He was one of the founding members of Friends of Warner Parks, a prominent businessman and known for giving really great cemetery tours here in the park. At the bottom is Bob Parrish. Bob actually took me on my first cemetery tour back in December 2020, and he is known as the historian of Warner Parks. To his right is Edwin Warner Bass, another founding member of Friends of Warner Parks and Edwin Warner's great-grandson. And then finally, Eleanor Willis, who was a Friends of Warner Parks executive director and just totally into celebrating the history of this beautiful place. On the right with the binoculars is Bob Brown. And what I can say about Bob Brown, if you know him, is he was into maps. So if you are into maps, I have some wonderful maps that Bob Brown shared with us, and also just a great historian that grew up over in the Bell Links area. Let's get started. So every time I share, yes, ma'am.
So when did Luke Lee become a colonel? Do you know?
Oh, I don't know, but I can tell you that Mary Louise Lee Tidwell wrote a book called Luke Lee, and we have a copy in the Nature Center, library. And so that's something we could very easily look up and send it in. Sound good?
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you.
Great question. So with every cemetery, I'm going to bring up this general map of Warner Parks. And I know it's an old map and it doesn't have topo lines, but I like it because it doesn't have all that extra stuff on it. I just want to kind of orient this map with you. This is Page Road, Chickering Road, Old Hickory Boulevard as it travels east to Brentwood. Here's Highway 100 down at the bottom, and the star right here not only is where the Nature Center is, but also where a cemetery lies right outside this window. So our first cemetery is the Reagan Cemetery. There are 2 grave markers, and I think when a lot of people see this, they think, oh, there should be more. There should be there should be a bigger graveyard. So what we did was actually go to the Davidson County Cemetery Survey, and this is something online. You can check it out and see if there were any other folks listed in this cemetery. Nobody else was listed. And here's something else. Both of these children, and if you'll notice by looking at the tombstone information at the bottom, these were babies, were the sons of a Methodist minister. And if anyone keeps better records than the government, it's the church. Their father was Reverend John Reagan, and he lived more than likely in the old Nature Center building, the building that we're using right now as our visitor center. So one cemetery right outside the door. Their mother was Fannie Page Reagan, and again, married to the Reverend John Reagan. Now, they're not buried here. They are buried over in Williamson County. So not here in Warner Parks, but I wanted you to notice this name, Page, because Page is going to come up over and over and over. All of the families here, many of the families here are connected. I said earlier 10 families, but that represents, just the home sites themselves, not all of the people that we're going to learn about today. Does anybody have any questions about the Reagan Cemetery before we move on? You can list those in the chat. Again, the chat is at the bottom of your screen. Just hover over the bottom and click on it, and you can type in your question.
Okay, I have a question. Someone wants to know if the Reagans had any surviving children.
Yes, they did. They did. I don't have any information. Y'all are going to notice as we go through these cemeteries that some of them have very involved descendants. I have tons of information, and a lot of them I don't have a lot of information. And this is one of those cemeteries, the Reagan Cemetery. Now, excuse me. Now, allergies. Now, I will share that the Reagan Cemetery is one of the sites that has been delineated. So delineating a cemetery means that you're going to hire an archaeologist, I don't do it, to actually come in and figure out where the graves are. And then therefore we can get an overall picture of where the boundaries of this cemetery are. So the archaeologist that actually did this work pro bono was Dr. Larry McKee just 2 years ago. And he did not find any other graves. And in fact, he actually went into the organic garden and did some probing and came right up against this building and did some probing just to see if there were any other graves in this area, and none were found. Are we ready to keep on going? The next cemetery that we're going to visit actually is right up behind the Nature Center, and I bet you've passed it more than once. As I walk over the little bridge next to the pond and head into Edwin Warner Park, I'm going to cross over the Natchez Trace. And as I start walking up into the woods, I start seeing some things that you will find very interesting. Can you tell me in the chat, what do you see in this Tennessee woods that indicates this would be a home site? Anybody have any ideas? What do you see that kind of looks out of place? I guess it's kind of like that song, one of these things does not belong. Anybody have something to share?
Someone says daffodils.
Very good.
Daffodils.
Wonderful.
Buttercups. Daffodils?
Something else that nobody talked about is if you look to the left here, I've got some yellow forsythia. Forsythia is not native to Tennessee, but that would have been something that people would have planted all of those years ago. So forsythia, daffodils. Let's see if we can find some more evidence. Yes, ma'am.
Someone's calling them yellow bells.
I've never heard that.
Calling them yellow bells. I had never heard that
I
either.
have a poll later that we need to add that to.
Yeah.
Let's keep on going. So as you're walking up the purple trail or the hungry, yes,
One more. Someone says they have seen old bits of plates and pottery in that area.
yes, yes. So now you're going to see where I'm going here in just a second. I love it that you guys are so observant. If you look right here where my cursor is, you can actually see some stonework that people have been walking over for years. I myself walked over this for years until an Eagle Scout project actually uncovered an entire foundation and a chimney. And I'm going to show you what this looks like now. If you look right here, this is the two cottonwoods we were looking at earlier. Here's the forsythias, and there is a house foundation. Right in here is where the chimney is to that house. So very, very exciting. We know that the home was there in the 1940s because it appeared in the Parks Insurance Report from the 1940s. And let me tell you, friends, if you want to see something really fun, check out this book. It is out of print now, The Parks of Nashville by Leland R. Johnson. It is from 1986. It is fascinating, giving you all kinds of information, not just documents like this Parks Fire Insurance Report, but also how much corn was grown in the Victory Gardens in Edwin Warner Park during World War II. I mean, just so much good information, and I really think that you would enjoy that. Can you put that in the chat, Melissa, if you don't mind? Leland R. Johnson, The Parks of Nashville. The chat is saved with this recording, so y'all will be able to check that out later. So here we have the go ahead. Here we have the DeMoss homestead. This is not the same DeMoss that founded Bellevue. That was Abraham DeMoss. He is a distant relative, but right now I actually have a volunteer, Nancy Skinner, who's doing some research on the DeMoss property to see if we can get some more information, because we have this beautiful cemetery, at least 2 known graves. That's word of mouth though. And there are several different ways that you can gather information from history. One being word of mouth, another being documentation. But the thing that doesn't lie is when you get an archaeologist out here. So I have a group who is removing exotics from this area and kind of clearing the entire area where we think the house is, so that an archaeologist can be called in to do some serious studying and find and just learn about this family. But in the meantime, I do want to tell you about the family. They always had rabbits in their blackberries, and their 4th of July celebration was the best out here. They were known for fireworks. So just wow, an amazing family. I have no pictures, I have no documentation on this family. If anybody is interested, you can shoot me an email at heather.gallagher@nashville.gov. You can see my name spelled underneath my video. And let me know that you want to start doing some research. Ancestry, the Nashville Room, there's so many different places to check it out. And have you noticed you walked under this well house a million times? Now you know what it's doing there. That was the well house where the DeMoss family got their water. Do we have any questions before we leave the DeMoss family and head on over to the Betts? Anybody have something to share? How about we take a breath for a minute? I have a poll to share. And I think you guys are going to like this. So evidence of the families that lived on this land pre-1927 can be found everywhere. You guys have already talked about this. Check everything that you have observed that humans have left behind. And please feel free to share a story in the chat if you have something else to share. So check this out. Daffodils, jonquils, buttercups, narcissus, yellow bells. I got it in there. Has anyone seen vinca? If you haven't, I'm going to show you some vinca, and then you're going to say, I see this everywhere. Stone home foundations and rock walls, flowering quince. You can walk in Percy Warner Park and find some flowering quince. You just might not know it. It's kind of a salmon colored flower. It's about this big. It's beautiful. Have you found cut nails, kitchen utensils, old bottles, and buttons? Maybe the pottery that we were talking about earlier? Wonderful. Let's see what people are saying, Melissa. So it seems that most people have seen the yellow bells everywhere, as well as those rock walls and stone home foundations. Fantastic. Do we have any stories shared?
No.
You said that so sad.
Oh, well.
Let's go ahead and head on to the Betts Cemetery. So years ago, you could actually drive the roads in Edwin Warner Park. And we're not talking about Percy Warner Park yet. We have pictures of people taking their old cars on the roads, and especially here on Gravity Hill. I've got my cursor on Gravity Hill right now. This pipe gate, when it's open, I like to take people in the park van and allow gravity to pull us uphill, a van with 12 people. It's kind of fun. If I am to walk down Gravity Hill, yes, it really goes down. If I'm to walk down it, I am going to come around a curve and you'll see a bench on your left. Go down the hill into the old road bed next to that bench. And then I want you to tell me when you see the cemetery. John Hardcastle always used to share this story about the cemetery. And as you would round a curve, you would see this. And it's just breathtaking. The daffodils, buttercups, jonquils, narcissus, etc., are just blooming, just out of control. They're so beautiful. We have several graves here at the Betts Cemetery. The Betts family is a wonderful family. I first came in touch with them, with descendants, back in 2006, and shared a bucket of chicken with them. I met Shannon Ballou, recently I met the Tallies, who are descendants of the Betts family, as well as Frank Betts. And Frank just passed on a couple of months ago. But they had some wonderful stories to tell about family reunions after this became parkland. I did have the opportunity to work with Larry McKee, who delineated the Reagan Cemetery, to do the Betts Cemetery as well. He is a teaching archaeologist, so he had some students out here and actually found several graves that were unmarked at the Betts Cemetery. So you can see some of these stones, such as Private William R. Terry's stone and Mr. and Mrs. Betts. This is William Betts and Shannon Ballou Betts. Have very ornate tombstones. This indicates wealth. And then at other times, we're just merely going to see a field stone or a depression that is marking a cemetery grave site. And that's why it's so important for us to keep relations with archaeologists such as Dr. McKee, who has since retired. Congratulations, Dr. McKee. The Betts home looked like this, and you can still follow the drive that I mentioned all the way up to the house. You can see where the cistern was, and you can also see their cellar where they kept coal. So kind of neat. Here's another picture from that Nashville Parks book. I'm telling you, you got to read it. So I've said the name Shannon Ballou several times, and I actually wanted to show you what that looked like. Just a beautiful tombstone. This tells us so much about the Betts family. They lived in Warner Parks until the mid-1930s, when their home was taken and their land, about 130 acres, through eminent domain, and they were given the fair market value price of $22,500, which is very interesting compared to prices in this area today. Melissa, did you have something to share?
No, I think not right now.
Well, thanks for popping in. Does anybody have any questions about the Betts family? Another family that I'm always interested in finding out more about. So if you have something to share, please let me know. We're going to get back out on Highway 100 and drive toward Brentwood, go past the Equestrian Center and up the hill to the Harpeth Hills Golf Course. It'll be on your left if you're looking at the map. Harpeth Hills Golf Course, by the way, is an 18-hole course. It's one of the best places to see wildlife in Warner Park. I've seen bobwhite, bobcat, purple martins, hummingbirds. It's just coyote. It's a wonderful place to see wildlife. And when the pandemic is finally in a better place, it's a great place to get a cheeseburger, right, Margaret? So this cemetery is called the Northern Cemetery, and I call it the Little Northern because we have a big Northern Cemetery as well. It is on your right. If you can see my cursor, just when you take a left into Harpeth Hills Golf Course, drive down just a little ways and you will see a pull-off on your right. Make sure if you decide to go visit the cemetery to pull off into that kind of driveway, because people are driving kind of fast up and down that road, and there's not a good place to pull off. There are at least 3 to 4 graves at this cemetery. A study in 2006 determined that the boundaries of this cemetery, which we now have enclosed by a fence, it's very small, but we're learning new things all the time. These stones were recently restored, and we're learning more wonderful things from Mr. Robert Northern, who is a descendant of the people buried in this cemetery. He provided us with a picture and lots more information. He has actually written a couple of small books to add to the Nature Center story of the Northern Hodge families. During one of the archaeological studies at the Northern Cemetery and Home Site, we were looking for exactly where the house was. Was it underneath the driveway to the Harpeth Hills Golf Course? Was it closer to the top of the hill where that maple tree is? Was it on the same side as the cemetery? So we called an archaeologist in, and he found a fireplace. And he found cut nails. We talked about cut nails earlier. Cut nails are a really big deal. That means that they were more than likely handmade. And also you can see on the left a fork. So we talked about pottery. We're still seeing more and more things that tell the story of these families. This cemetery right now is being maintained by a volunteer. The cemeteries that we've seen up into this point, DeMoss is volunteer maintained. Betts is maintained by our sweat crew in the summer, but Northern is maintained by a volunteer that comes out and weed eats and mows and makes sure that all of the stones are clear. And by the way, that's actually kind of what we have to do by law. Tennessee Annotated Code states that descendants should have access, and we kind of interpret that as reasonable access to their cemeteries, that the sites be cleared, and we go a step further to make sure that we can label, interpret, and really bring these people to life that lived in Warner Park before it was a park. Does anyone have any questions about the Northern Cemetery? If not, I want you to see something that's really interesting. If you can see my cursor, do you see this stone right here? And do you see this boundary stone? It actually has an N on it. Both of these are made out of marble. This is a big deal because notice the fieldstone right here. Having marble, you actually had to get that shipped in. You had to have that carved. That tells us a lot about the family without even really speaking. Really cool. Let's keep on going. Our next cemetery is going to be one of the largest cemeteries. But before I actually show you the cemetery itself, I want to talk to you about the people who live there. Francis Hodge and his family, including James and George Hodge, moved out to this area in the late 1700s and 1800s, and the Hodge House was built. The Hodge House, again, is located over on Chickering Road, kind of over there near the intersection of Chickering and Old Hickory Boulevard. The Hodge House was built in 1811. It was completely restored through a partnership with Friends of Warner Parks and Metro Parks between 2007 and 2009. This house was actually taken all the way down to the ground. And then an archaeological study was done, and I do have some wonderful artifacts that need to be cataloged if anybody's interested. Melissa, they're in the AV room right now, just lots and lots of cool stuff. And then the structure was rebuilt. This is available for rent, and also a great place to have programs. Melissa and I have had a couple of programs there. It's a lot of fun. The families of the Hodges and the Northerns stay involved with what's going on here in Warner Parks. The tree that I'm trimming right here actually is in memory of June Walden, whose family is her husband's family is buried in the Northern Hodge, Walden, Crawford, Moore, White Cemetery. If I enter the Harpeth Hills Golf Course off of Old Hickory Boulevard, come up to the clubhouse and take that dog leg to the right, go down into the golf course, and then come back up at the top of the hill, you'll see a split rail fence. And that is where the Northern Hodge Cemetery is. And it is, I think when we think about cemeteries, this is what we envision, is a marker out front to kind of tell the story of the family that lived there, as well as these huge stone walls. And the family legend has it that these stone walls were built in the 1800s by one African-American enslaved person who lifted stones as heavy as 500 pounds. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but it's a fabulous story. This wall has recently been restored through working with Metro Historic Commission. Friends, if you haven't figured it out, we work with so many different partners when it comes to cemeteries. Bellmead Plantation, Travelers Rest, Metro Historic Commission, as well as Historic Nashville, Inc. New South Associates. We have lots and lots of partners. We're very fortunate. This cemetery is the only one that is still open to burials. The people need to be descendants of the families that are in here, and the families work very closely with Metro Parks to make sure that the cemetery is maintained. Henry Vinson Walden is one of the people buried at that cemetery. Also, Joseph Sodick is someone who is buried at that cemetery. And I thought that his uniform was just really curious. And so I found some information from my friend Sarah Jo Wallen White about his uniform. And I just want to share this with you from the Tennessee Archives Encyclopedia of the Confederacy. He was a surgeon in the Confederate Army. His cadet gray tunic with black facings and stand-up collar. He has a star on his collar and it's dark blue. He has dark blue cloth with a 1 1/4 inch wide black velvet stripe. edged with gold cord running the length of his leg. Check out his green silk sash, gold buttons on his coat, and his cuffs are dark blue with a gold braid on the sleeve. He's wearing white gloves. He would have worn a cap with the letters MS for medical surgeon in gold. It's a very expensive uniform, and he wouldn't have worn this, of course, on the battlefield. But that just truly tells me the story of Joseph Sodick. His great granddaughter, I think I got that right, Susie, correct me if I'm wrong, is Sarah Jo Wallen White. She is a direct descendant of Francis Hodge, who was a signer of the Cumberland River Compact. He fought in the Revolutionary War and actually received a Revolutionary land grant over on Richland Creek. She's standing with her daughter, Susie. Now, the reason I wanted to put this picture in here, besides they're my friends, is the stone that Susie's hand is resting on. Susie is in orange. Is a stone that forever was at this cemetery, and somehow ended up in a barn somewhere else in the United States. The people who owned the barn found the stone, and somehow they were able to hook back up with Sarah Jo Wallen White, and she had that stone reinterred here in the cemetery. So just some really magical stories with the cemeteries here in Warner Park. These folks would have lived in Cedar Glen. That's where Joseph Sodick lived, and Sarah Jo Wallen White's mother, Josephine, was raised there. Cedar Glade was at, Cedar Glen. Terribly sorry, I've got Cedar Glades on the mind. Was at the corner of Chickering Road in the Chickering Road entrance to Percy Warner Park. And, there's not a house there now. It actually burned, but there is still the Cedar Glen Spring House. And it is just a beautiful little spring house. If you haven't seen it, it's right across the street from the contemporary home that has the martini flute in front of it. So I really recommend going and checking that out. It's a beautiful, especially right now, the redbud trees are blooming around it. Before we leave, this Northern Hodge, Crawford, Moore, Walden, White, and this is a Page descendant. There we go with Page again. Does anybody have any questions or anything to share? Please do.
Katie Fuller said that your discussion of the cemetery is magical.
Well, thank you very much. I think that I have a different point of view than a lot of people because I have been fortunate enough to meet descendants of these people and to hear their stories. So to me, it's not just a grave. It is a living, breathing person whose story continues. And I try to do my best to tell the stories. Let's keep going. Uh-oh.
But she just said that the headstone traveled to a random bar and back.
Oh, I know. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? Yeah. It's crazy. So we're going to leave we're going to leave Cedar Glen and we're going to continue down. Excuse me, elms are blooming. We're going to continue down on Chickering Road as if we're headed into Belmead, not Brentwood. We're going to head on Chickering Road. And if you look at my car, I'm right at the bottom of Snow Sledding Hill. So if I keep on going, Chickering Road goes to the right and Page Road goes to the left and goes to Belmead Boulevard. This is why I want you to be careful if you decide to visit these cemeteries. There is only room for one car. at this particular site. But anyway, let me show it to you on a map so you'll know exactly where this is. This is the Page Cemetery. And if you visit it right now, this is what you're going to find. The foundation of their home. If you walk up behind the home site, you'll find their cemetery. But if you would have been here 100 years ago, perhaps it looked more like this. So these were vibrant people that lived on and loved this land. I love that picture. It's just beautiful. And look again, we're seeing these things that we keep talking about over and over. We're seeing forsythia, we're seeing privet, we're seeing daffodils. One thing that's really beautiful about the Page House, if you go visit it right now, in the front of it is a circle of daffodils. And John Hardcastle would always say to people, why do you think there's a circle of daffodils right in the middle of the driveway? And he would look at you slyly and say, have you ever tried to back up a horse? Which I have tried to back up a horse. It doesn't work. So pretty neat to see the stories that these places tell. So again, at the intersection of Chickering Road and Page, the Page Place. And by the way, there is another cemetery across the street on Chickering Road up on the hill that is a Page cemetery. I'm sure that they're related, but we're talking about the ones in Percy Warner Park. This is the Page Cemetery, and as Stephen, if you're watching, this is the cemetery that I really want some work done next. I want to kind of tell you how cemeteries work. On the left, right here, is a headstone, and the information is facing west on this headstone. And on your right here is your footstone. If you were here in the early morning, the sun would be coming up from this direction. So these people are buried facing east. This is typical Judeo-Christian tradition from the late 1700s or maybe even earlier. And I think it still follows that tradition today. So you want to be buried facing east. Something else that you can notice right here is the cemetery vine. Just all over the place, that vinca that I told you that I'd show you. So very common in cemeteries. We have some ornate stones right here, but then I've got a field stone right here. This is one of the first cemeteries that was delineated in Warner Park back in 2001. And so we've got some really good information on this site. And something that I think is really fascinating about it is, remember how I told you that all of these families are connected? You know, you think that you found somebody over here that has nothing to do, and then you're like, oh my gosh. Susan Harding from the Bellamy Plantation Hardings married into the Page family. Friends, I have so many documents, death certificates, birth certificates, deeds, just all kinds of information. If you're interested in going through this information with me, it's really interesting. It's a lot of fun. Let's move on. Here's an example of one of those marriage licenses that I was telling you about. And notice that right here, I've got Sawyer in. The Sawyer family married into the Northerns. They also married into one of the stones at the Little Northern Cemetery is Daisy Dean Sawyer. She was Daisy Dean Northern. So there's a connection. Also, the Sawyer family married into the Betts family, I believe. So lots of connections within Warner Park, all of these families. Here's that vinca up close that I told you about. Now, this is not at the Page Cemetery. I did not feel like getting ticks today. It was a little bit warm outside, but it did run up here behind the Nature Center to the DeMoss Cemetery. and get a picture of this vinca vine. It's got many different names. Cemetery vine is one, vinca, periwinkle is another name. So when you see this, especially in the Smoky Mountains, when you see daffodils, these are things that are not native. Cemetery vine isn't invasive, so that's something to keep in mind. And yes, it is still sold in big box stores, but I do discourage you from planting it because it just spreads so quickly, which would have made sense in the 1800s, so that you didn't have a tree growing up in your cemetery somewhere you didn't want it. But not really something that you know we want to encourage now. We've got somebody that wants to say something, Melissa. Anything to share?
Yes, there's a Page family reunion every couple of years in Santa Fe, Tennessee. It is a running joke that nobody ended up with the Harding money. And this is from, looks like it's.
You all are just wrong.
Someone is interested in the Sawyers buried and related to those buried in the park. Also, isn't there a Sawyer Cemetery in the park? Pam wants to know.
Okay, great observation, Pam. Okay. The Little Northern Cemetery was actually referred to as the Sawyer Cemetery until the name was legally changed with the Metro Historic Commission in 2006, because that's when we found out through Mr. Robert Northern that that was a Northern cemetery. In addition, there is a Dempsey Sawyer. Where does this information come from, Melissa? It's like buried inside me. A Dempsey Sawyer Cemetery in Bellevue that is very well known. I do have information on that, Pam, if you would like some more information on Dempsey Sawyer Cemetery. Anything else?
No, not right now. Oh, well, someone does want to know, why were there daffodils in a circle? I am not following how the horse comes into play.
Okay. Have you ever been to somebody's house that had a turnaround so that you didn't have to back your car up? The daffodils were in a circle so that if you had a horse attached to a wagon, you could go around that circle. That's okay. It took me a minute too. Anybody else?
I think we're good.
I think we should keep going.
I think so.
Fantastic. You know what I was doing. Okay, the next cemetery that we are going to visit is the one that has been the most intriguing to everyone. It is located at the corner, at the corner of Harpeth Trace and Highway 100. So if you're familiar with the stoplight at Harpeth Trace and Highway 100, I want you to face the park and you can see an old maintenance road. Remember, it used to be open and now there's a wooden beam across there. On your left is a west-facing hill. That entire hillside is covered with graves. In a 1990 study of that hillside, let us know that there were over 200 graves in just this one place. But that study was not done using ground penetrating radar. It wasn't done using our probing method that I talked about earlier. This was just a survey by a Vanderbilt student group. So there were many different theories about this many graves being in one place. So the first theory kind of makes sense. On the other side of Highway 100, on the Harpeth Trace side, there are several small houses where railroad workers lived while the train was being built, maintaining the railroad tracks, CSX workers. Could it be possible that the people buried here in this cemetery actually were train workers? Okay, now I'm not saying that they're not, but what I am saying is that 200, furthermore, if I was a train worker, I had free transportation to get back home. So let's kind of put the train worker thing over here. The second thing that a lot of people thought, I used to think was kind of way out there. But after the last year, it's not so unbelievable. And that was there was a pandemic and many people died, and that this was a mass grave. Okay, think about your Facebook page, think about the newspaper, think about your letters to your friends. I know that in the last year, I've sent more postcards and letters to people than I ever have before. There would be documentation of a pandemic that killed 200 people in Vaughn's Gap. That's a lot of people. So the last theory, and I'm not saying that a bunch of people didn't get sick and were interred here, but this many. So let's kind of set that over here in the parking lot as well. So I was sharing this story with a friend at Bellamy Plantation back in 2002, and she said, well, let's think about this. The boundaries of Bellamy Plantation actually stopped right here at this maintenance road. So is it possible that somehow the cemetery is related to the plantation? Let's think about it even more. I already said that this was west facing. So perhaps these were people who were not high up on the totem pole, people who were in a different system than the Hardings or anybody else in this area. But let me tell you this, the graves in this cemetery, the people are buried uphill. The grave is actually facing uphill. And if you look at this one in particular, you can see a headstone and a footstone, and they're actually facing uphill. So these people were following Judeo-Christian tradition. If you get close to the site, you'll see structures like this. And for years, this was thought to have been an altar within the cemetery. Someone else thought that it was a wall. But when this site was actually delineated in 2007, it was determined that this actually was the foundation of an old church, which we knew about. We knew that there was an old church somewhere around here. We just didn't know where it was from Dorothy Page Suggs. Furthermore, there were cut nails, melted window glass, and some other indicators that this had been a structure in the early part of the 1900s. So pretty cool. Over 240 graves were found during that archaeological study. Here is the marker. This is what they kind of look like. And you can still find some of these markers up in the cemetery. I've tried to remove most of them because they're not attractive anymore. Here is a death certificate that was discovered in the archives of Bellamy Plantation in 2002 for Emma DeMoss. Now, check this out. There are lots of things here that I want you guys to connect. One is that last name, DeMoss. This is the third time DeMoss has come up in Warner Parks. Another thing I want you to notice is the date. It's 1902, so this is post-antebellum times. She was 11 years old. As far as we know, Emma DeMoss died of pneumonia, and she was a field worker listed in the information from Bellamy Plantation. So we've got many different pieces coming together to give us insight into who is buried in Vaughn's Gap. We also know some of the Vaughn family was buried there. Some Scotts were buried there, some Pages. So this huge community cemetery. And right now, Friends of Warner Parks is funding a study of that cemetery to take place very soon. F. Lynn Bacleda, who has written the History of Warner Parks book, due out soon, is working with me to just really pull together histories of the families at Vaughn's Gap Cemetery. Does anybody have any questions about Vaughn's Gap Cemetery? They look like they're rolling in.
Katie says, I am surprised there was nothing in the newspapers from back then about a pandemic.
There was information round about the beginning of the 1900s of a pandemic that hit Memphis. And remember, Melissa, when we went to Lichterman, that timeline when you walked in, there's all kinds of information about a pandemic, but nothing here in Nashville. But that doesn't mean it's not out there. It just means that you guys need to get out there and find it for me.
Well, Katie said if it was a pandemic, would it have been pneumonia? And she's so surprised there are over 200 bodies. And Stephanie wants to know why remove the stones.
Ooh, we didn't remove the stones. I merely removed these. I'm pointing at my screen and wondering why you can't see it. These little brushes that marked each of the stones. I did not remove any stones. That's actually against the law. Something else that I didn't share, Melissa, I didn't share this with you earlier. Pat Holliday, rest in peace, was an amazing geologist here in Middle Tennessee and just worked all over the place. He was pretty fantastic. And he actually took a look at Vons Gap Cemetery just to see if he could tell, were the graves all made simultaneously? You know, what did he think? And he said no, they were all buried at different times. So there you go. It's many different pieces, right? It's many different things coming together. We're going to go down that old maintenance road, which is illegal now. You can't go down the old maintenance road anymore. And go visit the Scott family. I have a visitor. The Scott Cemetery is located in Scott Hollow. If you've hiked the Mossy Ridge Trail, you have passed this over and also called the Red Trail. You've passed over this cemetery many, many times. It's near the picnic shelter in Scott Hollow. There are about 10 graves there. And can you notice a few things that we've already talked about, such as we've got a headstone and a footstone. Here's the footstone. Here's the headstone facing east. Stop me if you need to, Melissa. Otherwise, I'm going to keep on going. Here's that configuration I was talking to you about. I just wanted you to see it from looking down. This cemetery has not been delineated, and I don't have a lot of family information on this site. I don't really have any good stories or anything. I've got lots of death certificates, birth, and marriage certificates from this site. So pretty fun. In fact, I've got great census records. So this is James Scott. He actually had 3 different wives, and his last wife, Myrtle Vaughn, actually owned the land that the Vons Gap Cemetery was on and sold that land to Luke Lee before this became a park in the 1920s. So just, there's so much to learn about these different sites. There's just so much going on. So we're now going to visit the Knight Cemetery, and the Knights were just I think that this is a family that's really interesting to me because I'm a dog person, obviously, and I just can picture Janie Clardy Knight with her dog, and she actually died with her dog in her lap when her house burned back in the early 1900s. There are 2 graves at the Knight Cemetery, Janie Clardy Knight and her husband. And you can actually see that right off of the cross-country course. Here's a picture of Janie Clardy Knight. It says she was 79 years old when she passed away. Before we get to our next cemetery, I want you to let me know if you have any questions.
Okay, Heather, someone wondered if the graves at the Vons Gap Cemetery might have been from the train wreck in Belmead in 1918. Is there any indication that people were buried there?
We are looking into that right now.
Okay.
That's a really great observation, and we're looking into that. Thank you.
And she also wants to know if you have any idea about the oldest and youngest bodies, and in the cemetery, like, we obviously know there was an 11-year-old, but any other?
No, I don't have any other information. But again, Lynn is working on this, and we are bound and determined to tell the story of the people in that cemetery. Anybody else have anything? All right, we've got one more. I can't believe we visited. Oh, go ahead.
Katie's just saying this is great info. So
So our final cemetery is on the newest part of Warner Parks, known as the Birch Reserve. This land was required just recently and is right across the street from the Nature Center. So if I am sitting on Old Hickory Boulevard, coming from Brentwood, and I'm a dead end at Highway 100, and I look across the street, you just go straight into the Birch Reserve. So the Birch Reserve is not on this map, but I wanted to give you a star anyway, just so that I can continue and be consistent. The Richards Cemetery actually appears on the 1968 Bellevue Quadrangle map of this area, which is just a topographical map of the area. And when we first actually went over and hunted for the Richards Cemetery, this is what we found. It's covered up with honeysuckle. The stones are in pieces. You can kind of see over here to the right, there's like fragments of a rock wall. So we started doing some research, working with a grad student from MTSU, and it was determined that this is Elizabeth Richards and her sister. And Elizabeth Richards, in her will, this grad student found, I can't take credit for it, dictated exactly what their graves would look like, their headstones, their footstones, and that there would be a rock wall encircling this. And so Friends of Warner Parks this year has allocated money for this. And this is a picture, about 3 hours ago. So pretty exciting. This is actually taking place. And I want you to see one of these stones up close. This says so much about these women. Think about this time period. This is the 1850s. This woman wrote her own will. This woman had means to build a wall and have a stone. I mean, this is just incredibly empowering. Just beautiful. Friends, I know that we've shared a lot. I'm doing my conclusion. Hang on.
Before I have some questions. Carolyn Warren, Warren wants to know if you have any information on the cemetery at Innsworth property?
No.
No. Okay. How about?
Not that I don't want to. It's just that's the Hicks, McGavick, Hardings. Right. So they have that information.
So was there an influenza epidemic here in 1919? Were we part of that in 1918?
The Spanish flu? I don't know. Yeah. These are all great questions. I hope somebody's taking notes.
Yeah, and a lot of this is a great program. So I'll let you wrap up. Okay.
I am not about reading a PowerPoint to you guys. You guys are smart because you already said this was fun. So you're smart. These are the current projects going on in Warner Parks right now. There's so much more to be done. If you enjoy getting out and getting dirty and pulling honeysuckle and lugging a mower through the woods, I've got an amazing job for you. If you like sitting at a computer and researching genealogy.com or ancestry.com, I would love to take advantage of your membership. There's so many wonderful things going on to celebrate the history of Warner Parks. As we come up on our 100th, oh my gosh, our 100th anniversary in 2027, we don't want to forget the people who made this land what it is today, these first families. So I have to thank you all so much for joining me. I want to thank Melissa for being here tonight, and of course, Friends of Warner Parks for their support, as well as providing this Zoom space for us. This is a partnership program with Metro Parks of Nashville and Warner Park Nature Center. The purpose of this program was not only to tell you what's going on here in Warner Park, but to get you interested in your own family. So this has been recorded. It'll be on our YouTube channel soon. And thank you so much for everything. This has been my pleasure. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat.
Okay, Heather, there's one question. Did you say that it was determined that the graves in the Vaughn's Gap Cemetery were not the same age? The 240 graves, were they from different time periods? I think is the question.
And I can't say that. Our geologist said that. Like a for real geologist said these were not all dug at the same time.
Okay. And do you know there's a cemetery across from the park property on Highway 70 South? Do you know if there's any Warner Park connection there, if it's any of the same families?
That's a really great question. Ask if I guess I can ask. There is a Vaughn Cemetery at the corner of Highway 100 and Vaughn's Gap Road across from West Side Athletic Club. We are researching that cemetery right now. Lynn Bacleda, to determine if you know what exactly is the relation between that Vaughn's Gap Cemetery and our Vaughn's Gap Cemetery and Johnson Vaughn and Myrtle. Well, Myrtle Vaughn was his daughter, but I mean, there's so many, you know, pieces, and we need your help. Y'all are asking great questions.
Becky wants to know if you know the name of the church that was at the Vaughn's Gap Cemetery.
No. Now, in some documentation that we have, it is called a Grapevine Church. But kind of the whole deal about a Grapevine Church, does everybody know what a Grapevine Church is? Okay. So a Grapevine Church would have been a special place for African-American enslaved people to meet on a Sunday, probably in the middle of the woods, probably somewhere secret. So that was a hypothesis that that's what that was, and that it later became a regular community gathering place. I don't know. And it needs to be said that in order to make a lot of these assumptions for which we have that are completely speculation, I can't do that. I want to give you all information that's as accurate as possible. Thank you all for joining us tonight, and I will see you soon.